Okay, we are studying from the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and time frame wise, it is not too terribly removed from, if you can remember back far enough to, I guess it was two lessons ago in the book of Esther. Esther, if you remember, we talked about how that the events of the book of Esther took place during the captivity in Babylonia, and whereas Jeremiah and Daniel, some of Jeremiah, Daniel and Ezekiel were prophesying in the land of Babylonia at different times in different places during that captivity, and then maybe later they got to go back, and Esther remained behind. She was one of the ones that apparently did not go back to Jerusalem, to Judea. Well, Ezra and Nehemiah are going to be parts, respectively, parts of the groups that did go back to Jerusalem whenever the captivity was over. So Ezra, they're kind of grouped together as far as the order of our books is concerned, and that's for good reason. And coming right after 2 Chronicles is more or less chronological as well. But before Judah was ever conquered, God sent prophets to the people telling them that it was going to happen. In fact, he told them some important things about he didn't just tell them it was going to happen, he told them some things about what was going to happen. For instance, Isaiah said that they would eventually return from that captivity. So before the captivity had even happened, God already had prophets declaring that there would be an end to the captivity. And not just an end, but an end that would, fill their souls with some joy at least, because they were going to be able to come back. The land of Israel was so precious to them, so the idea of losing it was just horrifying. So the idea that they would be able to come back at some point, of course it wouldn't be in their lifetimes, but their people would be able to come back was good news. He even named the person who was going to allow them to come back. Ironically, if we want to call it that, we'll see a little bit more on that later this morning. But Isaiah actually gave the name of the Persian king who was going to do this thing a long time before it ever happened. Not just said that it would happen, but said who was going to be in charge and make it happen. He lived over a century before the captivity had even started, Isaiah did. And yet he named the man who would be the king and allow them to come back. Jeremiah also prophesied about this captivity, and you can imagine that the people of Israel are not going to be very thrilled to hear a prophet of Israel tell Israel that Israel is going to be conquered. Not a popular sermon, I would say, to have to preach. And they were not crazy about it. He actually told them it was going to last 70 years. Exactly the amount of time that the captivity would last, Jeremiah told them ahead of time. It's going to be, it's not a pleasant time. They brought it on themselves, but 70 years. And if you recall in some of our studies of that time period, in Jeremiah especially, there were other false prophets that were saying, no, it's only going to be a couple years. First they said it's not going to happen. That's number one. This will never happen. Kind of like Peter telling Jesus about his crucifixion. No, that will never happen, period. Well, then it happened. So then it's like, well, it happened, okay, but it won't last 70 years. It's only going to last a couple years. Then we'll get to go back. Don't settle in here in Babylonia. We'll be going back real soon. A couple years. Well, a couple years go by. Still there. And Jeremiah, more and more, was proven to be correct. Although he was not crazy about this news either. It broke his heart, naturally. But finally, those 70 years passed, or ended, and that brings us really to the book of Ezra. Cyrus is the king of Persia. And a good way to think of, if you remember, the captivity happened in 3 different groups. They didn't all go at once. But Nebuchadnezzar came in. First he took the rich ones, the richest, the highborn, the nobles, and people like that. Then quite a few years later, there was another group. And then a few years later, a third group. And then that was everybody. Well, when they went back, it was the same thing. 3 groups. And the way that, I think a helpful way to think of the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, there's only 2 books, right? But there were 3 returns. Well, Ezra covers 2 of these returns. Ezra 1 through 6 covers the first return. So Zerubbabel was the first leader that took the first group back. So Ezra 1 through 6 is that, Zerubbabel. Just think of that as Zerubbabel. Ezra 7 through 10, Ezra. And then Nehemiah was about the third one, led by Nehemiah. So that's what this quarter will cover. It's the 3 returns from Babylonian captivity back to the land of Judah and Israel, Jerusalem and Judah. And it's not just history. There's plenty of things we can learn from God's people. God's people in the past can teach God's people in the present lessons. That's just how history should work. And we'll get to learn from these great godly leaders like those 3 men I mentioned, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. And we'll learn some things about Cyrus. We'll also learn some things about God. Because the Old Testament is full of rich lessons about God, or just things to learn about God. And this period is no exception to that. Should be a very fruitful study. Anybody have any comment so far? Well, here's how it starts. Ezra 1:1. Kind of a recap of the end of 2 Chronicles, if you notice in your Bible, the last couple verses. It says this: In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of Jehovah by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Jehovah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Here's what it said. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, Jehovah, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Maybe we can stop right there for just a second. So, first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. It's not exactly clear what year they're counting, they're meaning as his first year. Sometimes that's kind of ambiguous depending on what they're counting from or what time frame they're using. But at any rate, it's neither here nor there. The shocking thing about this is what he said. He said that the God of, first of all, he said Jehovah. How much do you think Cyrus, under normal circumstances, all things being equal, how much would you expect Cyrus, the king of Persia, to know about Jehovah, the God of Israel? Probably not a whole lot. How much did the Egyptians know about Jehovah back in that time period? Not a whole lot.
The Babylonians had the educated youth as advisors, right?
Yes. Like Daniel and yeah.
So they would have known. So Cyrus, if he is wise, addressing these people, would speak in terms that these people understand, right, to inform himself.
Mm-hmm.
Before.
That is possible. It follows.
Still, it would be the finger of God guiding him without him knowing it.
Yeah.
He thinks he's being wise, and God is wiser than he is.
Yeah, it's interesting. He doesn't call him the God of Israel. He calls him the God of heaven. And, I don't really know what maybe he is thinking of as heaven. Does he mean everything, the God of everything? Or we've talked about in the past how, paganism or idolatry, the way they viewed gods in the ancient world was, got the God of the hills, or might be the God of the seas, or this is the God of the valleys, and that kind of thing. They got power here, don't have much power here. Well, it's interesting that he calls Jehovah the God of heaven. And here's what we can take from verse 2. He learned this somewhere, somehow, in order to say this, that God, the true God even, he doesn't say that, but we know that's who he's talking about. He's the one that gave him all these kingdoms. And he said he's the one that has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem. Now, there are only so many options for how Cyrus could have known this. One of them is, we'll just get the easy one out of the way. It's by no means the correct one, and it's probably unlikely. But the most obvious assumption that somebody might have is that God told him. There's one possibility. God told him. We don't have a record that God told him, but maybe he did. We have no idea. God didn't normally do that. With Nebuchadnezzar, I guess in a way, one of the predecessors of Cyrus, the old Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, not the old one, but before Persia and the Medes and the Persians, God said he's just doing what he wants to do. He's got no idea. He's doing what I want him to do. He's just doing what he wants to do. And Cyrus, he was probably the same way.
Would he have heard of the prophecies?
That's another possibility, that he heard about the prophecies. Remember, we just pointed out, Isaiah prophesied him by name over 100 years before. If I'm not mistaken, even 100 years before the man was even born. He wasn't even born yet. Cyrus did not exist. Not even little baby Cyrus didn't exist. And Isaiah called him by name and said he'll be king. He'll be God's instrument that he's going to use to bring back the people, to bring back our people to our homeland. Dean, do you have something?
Well, also it says here Jeremiah prophet also
Yeah.
said the same thing. So we see that God was prophesying to these individuals, and God was putting his plan into effect by what those men had spoken. God now is carrying out what he had told them to say. Now he is carrying it out. And the thing is, regardless, God was in control here, in God's providence, that somehow we know that Cyrus possibly knew him, whether he might have spoken directly to him, or he heard about the prophet Isaiah and Jeremiah. Of course, we know that there was Jewish people living among them, so maybe he heard one of those, maybe referring to the prophecies. And but whatever it was, we know that God had already said this was going to happen, and now it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. God's been working. He does that a lot. He's working on things that we don't have any idea what he has in store. Habakkuk learned that lesson when he cried out to God and said, "When are you going to do something?" And God answered him and said, "I'm working on it." And you wouldn't even know, you wouldn't even believe it if I told you, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you anyway. Yes, sir.
I just thought of something about the first explanation that by no means the correct one, that God has told. It makes me think that Isaiah says, this is the word of the Lord about Cyrus. I put you in that place, though you know me not. So it makes me think that no, he did not know him.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that particular phrase there.
Just came out.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a third. Okay, so we got that God told him. That's one. It's possible. Okay, it may not be probable. It's possible. Maybe some of the people of maybe some of the Jews told Cyrus about the prophecies. That's the second. But then there's a third possibility that, what if the prophecies of Isaiah had already been recorded, and somebody showed him on the scroll the prophecy. And he got to see it for himself, not just hear it, but got to see it. I don't know if there's no way to prove that either. There's no way to prove any of them. But it's just a fascinating thought to consider and to imagine what it would have been like to be Cyrus, and for you to see this, 100-plus-year-old prophecy that has you by name mentioned. But the thing that we know is that he found out somehow. He came to understand or to believe that, the unseen doings of Jehovah and how it included him in this moment. He had risen up. Now he's the ruler of the biggest empire in the world. And he understood that one of the things that he is expected to do from this God that he doesn't even know is to build him a house in Jerusalem. Now, it wasn't exactly right. I mean, the gist was, it was good, close enough. We have to cut him a little slack, I guess, for being unfamiliar with, the fine details. But he didn't technically charge Cyrus to build the temple, but we know what he means. So the only way for that to be done, or the most effective way for that to be done, is to send, as he says in the next verse, whoever is among you of all his people, that God, Jehovah's people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of Jehovah, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let each survivor, in whatever place he sojourns, be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides freewill offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So that's really the rest of the prophecy. To send, here they get to go home. They get to go home. One detail that I overlooked unintentionally is, first of all, I guess two details. Ezra says that this happened at this time so that the word of Jehovah would be fulfilled that Jeremiah spoke. This was to fulfill what Jeremiah spoke, also to fulfill what Isaiah spoke, but he's referring specifically to one of the prophecies of Jeremiah. And then secondly, he says, in order for this to take place and be fulfilled, Jehovah stirred up his spirit, the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made this proclamation. Now, that leads to another, basically the discussion that we already had. In what way did God stir up his spirit? Well, the possibilities are still those same three possibilities, really. God did it directly. He did it indirectly by having been informed of the prophecies, either in word or in writing. Any three of those, God is a means by which God can stir up somebody's heart. It's just a fact. We don't have to assume that he did something in there directly to his heart and stirred it up, but it could have been one of those other things. I think, let me speak for myself at least, I think if somebody showed me a 100-something-year-old prophecy that had my name in it, that obviously was referring to me, that would I would be stirred up quite a bit. So that could certainly be the way that God stirred up his heart. But God can stir up people's hearts, even people like Cyrus. Not just people like Jeremiah that serve him wholeheartedly always. Somebody like Cyrus. Even. God can use these people, and he has. And here he is again, using another, just like he used Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he called Nebuchadnezzar my servant. Cyrus is also his servant. Yes?
He used Pharaoh, same way.
Yeah, he used Pharaoh. He told him, I raised you up where you are now, just for this very moment. A chilling thought, invigorating. So, Persian Empire, that's not the whole thing. I zoomed it in a little bit just to get an idea of the kind night journey. It's not the best map. I forgot to put a map, as I always do, so I threw this one up there at the last second. It's the best one I could find on short notice. The people of Israel will be basically somewhere in this general region, kind of right in the middle of all the yellow. And here's Judea. Jerusalem will be somewhere around probably the lower right corner of the letter J in Judea there. So they're going to be making a pretty big trek back, just like they made a pretty big trek. And to get there, now they're going to get to come back finally into their little land of Judah, all because of Cyrus. Probably worth noting. I guess we can look to the next little bit. But it's probably worth noting, this may seem like unbelievable, like in as far as these kinds of leaders would never do this, somebody might say. This would never happen in real life. This is the Jews wrote this, it's a fabrication, just like lots of national records of antiquity are fabricated or exaggerated. This is just going too far. This would never happen in the real world. Well, it's not that far-fetched, really. Even if you take out the stuff about God prophesying that this would happen and then Cyrus's heart being stirred up to do what was prophesied, it's not that unheard of or far-fetched because some rulers rule differently than other rulers. And sometimes it's smart. Cyrus, we shouldn't paint him as this wonderful, beautiful man that was so kind and compassionate that he let the Jews go home. He wouldn't have done this if there wasn't some benefit in some way. Maybe that's also not cutting him any slack instead of giving him too much credit when I'm not giving him enough credit. But it's not that unheard of, even without the supernatural element in this, for this to happen. Because
I was thinking, even if he was just thought, he was shown the scroll and he thought, wow, that's crazy. And even if it was just for superstitious reasons, he might have been like, I'm just going to go ahead and go along with this, even if he didn't really deeply in his heart,
yeah. We don't know. We don't have any record that he was ever convinced to believe in Jehovah as the true God, the only God, or that he became a Jewish proselyte. Obviously, there's a very, very, very small chance that happened. But he may have thought this is a wise thing. And some of the rulers, I think the Persian rulers, and specifically, this was not an irregular thing that they did. They let, this would make these people content in a way and at peace, not likely to rise up and try to start a rebellion. He's throwing them a bone, kind of. I mean, what's the worst they can do? They're going to go back to this place and build a temple so they can worship their God, and they'll be happier there, and then be better constituents there. They'll be good little boys and girls there, more so than they would be if we rule with an iron fist and continue to just take and not give anything. So it's not a reasonable argument to say this would never happen and therefore it didn't happen. Yeah, Dean?
He even gave vessels of silver and gold. So he gave them, we say treasures, and even goods to these two to go back and make this trip. But it's going to cost the other basically that many people to go back, and we see that for some reason he did give them silver and gold and whatever they needed for that trip.
Yeah.
So it's something like that. And usually, like you said, a lot of the faces of kings at that time, there was a reason behind it. They were looking for you stretch my back, I'll stretch yours.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some things that, possibly that God used their, desires and stuff like that. God used it for purposes to carry out his plan.
Yep.
They thought they was going to get something back in return.
Yeah. Even if it was popularity. That is something in return. And you can imagine how, a new leader rising up and liberating these peoples, that's going to make people like you more, in general. And, love is a much better motivator for loyalty than fear, pretty much every time. So it's not that Cyrus wasn't going to get anything out of this. But at the same time, he did, give him the credit he does deserve, he did do it. He did do this thing. And he even, like Dean alluded to, he was going to help finance some of it. Yeah.
And also, he didn't release all the Jews, because some of the Jews stayed.
Yeah, some stayed.
Another key too, so why, if he's why didn't he send them all back? But he did. So there's another reason, this somebody asked us, like you said, why did he do that?
Yeah. As far as we know from the text, it seems that all of them were allowed to go. Some of them didn't go, and that's why when we get to Ezra, that was the thing is, Esther. That seems to have been during a time when some of them had maybe it was different, but at any rate, some went, some didn't. In fact, we're going to see a lot didn't. A lot of them didn't go. Yeah.
Well, just like with the children of Israel, we know that when they was in the land of Canaan, there were two tribes that liked what they were getting there in the land of Canaan. In the wilderness, they
Yeah.
liked that, so they stayed behind. And that is like another place. We know that some of the children of Israel, when they were in these other lands, they liked it better there than what was back there. So. I don't know if that was true here. Some of these people here were liking what they had, even though they were slaves. But yet we know that some people accepted it.
Yeah. We have to remember the captivity lasted 70 years. So almost everybody, and the reason I say almost is because there is the possibility that there were a few who had actually lived to see the old temple, and they were weeping because the new one was so inferior to the old one. Now, maybe that was maybe they used their knowledge about the old one and never had seen it with their own eyes, but the text doesn't specify. So, at the very least, the huge vast majority had been born here. This is all they ever knew. They'd never even been to Israel before. So we can understand why some of them may have been hesitant. And God doesn't seem to have held that against them. And as we're going to see, they had a part to play in all of this as well. Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you.
If you think about it, going away from everything you've ever known to what, and to work hard when you already, like some of them were probably pretty high up in like administrative structures or what have you. Like they had good spots, good lives, even good faithful Jewish lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so to leave that to go into practically the unknown.
Yeah.
Big move.
It wouldn't be easy. By any means, would not be easy. Uncomfortable, dangerous, and just the unknown factor, like you said, that would be enough for some of them. And they had plenty of time, just like Jeremiah had told them near the beginning. You need to settle in, plant your feet here. You're going to be here for a while, and that's what they did. So by the time the captivity was over, what we have is God's people who had done as Jeremiah said, and they were firmly planted, and this was their life now. But now they have this opportunity, as he says here in verse 5, then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up to rebuild the house of Jehovah that is in Jerusalem. And all who were about them aided them with silver, vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, with beasts, and with costly wares, besides all that was freely offered. If you remember, I think we just read a couple verses ago, Cyrus said, let each survivor, wherever he is, be assisted by men with these kinds of things. But then there were also free will offerings in addition to that. So we have those whose spirits were stirred up to go back and rebuild. which that's another thing we probably should mention. They weren't just getting to go home. Their home was a pile of rocks now, basically. So they didn't have a home to go to except for the ground itself, the borders that were even questionable at this time. That's all they had. They had to rebuild everything, including the temple and everything else, their houses. The whole city was totally razed to the ground. So everybody whose spirit was stirred up to go back, and then everybody else, which seems to suggest those that weren't going to go were to help them in their work. Now, how can they help rebuild a temple in Jerusalem if they don't go with the people to Jerusalem? Well, it says money, things, beasts. They're going to need some beasts of burden, some transportation. They're going to need other goods, other wares, and that is the role they were to play. And then here is where we read that Cyrus, the king, also brought out the vessels of the house of Jehovah that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. From our study of all the men and women of the Bible on Sunday afternoon, you might remember, it wasn't that long ago, we talked about Belshazzar. That's the last time we read, at least here in this congregation, that we've read of those vessels. And I guess chronologically is also the last time you will read if you read it in a chronological way. Well, those vessels are now brought back up. Belshazzar used them in his debauchery and for the drunken feast and whatever else was going on. And he paid the price for that, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. Now Cyrus, rather than doing something like that, he is going to go get them and give them to the Jews and say, here, you can have these back now. Take these back to where they belong. They came from your temple, the temple of your God. Here they are. When you rebuild, you can put these back to where they rightly belong. Cyrus, king of Persia, brought these out in the charge of Mithredath, the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. Okay, there was the purpose. Everything's fallen into place. Finally, in the next chapter, now the next part of our lesson text is in the next chapter. The first quite a bit of chapter 2 is, as you can see, more or less an inventory of people. And there's a reason for this. This was not just, boring details that have no significance in any way. And it's not even just to show the number for the sake of, it, of having a number. But we can learn something from the number, as we'll see. So, in verse 64, chapter 2, Ezra 2, verse 64, it says that the total number of those that went back to Jerusalem, or Judah, besides their male and female servants, so not counting the servants, 42,360. What do you think? Sound like a lot or not a lot?
That was just the men, wasn't it?
Well, it doesn't say the men. It just says it doesn't count servants. Usually it specifies, the men besides women and children, like when Jesus fed the 5,000 and the 4,000 and whatnot. Here it just says the whole assembly besides servants. Yes, sir. Sorry.
To put the number into context, it's like
10 Sullivans. Now, that kind of makes it sound like a lot to me. But if you think about the estimates of how many Jews there were, at least it's recorded, how many there were in Jerusalem every Pentecost time, and during those 3 feasts, we're talking a huge number. As many as, it's difficult to know which estimates are accurate or maybe exaggerated, but some of the estimates are, go over 1 million. And at least maybe hundreds of thousands. 42,000. In other words, that's a it's not a small number, it's a relatively small number. The city was way big enough to be able to house 42,000 people. So it's kind of it's a humbling number compared to the ones that left. You compare it to other times things were numbered. if I can find it here. Numbers 1:46 and then Numbers 26:51, the numbers of those who left Egypt and then the number of those who entered into Canaan. You know, these comparisons are insightful at least. And whenever we understand that only 42,000 Jews came back, it just shows how much had changed. How much it would have been changed forever, really, from that point on. And I'll remind us again, whenever God sent Nebuchadnezzar to Judah, you see, Assyria had already taken Samaria, the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, about 150 years earlier. Then finally, Judah went down too. And that is when they stopped being a sovereign nation. They were no longer sovereign. In fact, it kind of happened a little bit before that because they were simply paying tribute to the others, and that pretty much takes away your sovereignty in itself. But even though God was letting some of them go back, one thing that God did not ever prophesy or tell them was that it would ever be like it was before. Because it wasn't. It never was. It still isn't. What's over there now, I've pointed out many times, is not the same. It's not the same nation. It's not the same land, not the same people. Human beings created that. God created the nation of Israel of old. But yes, they got to go back, but they were still part of the Persian Empire. They were not a nation. They were not their own people. They were not independent. They were not sovereign. They just had they were entitled to live in Judah again, by God and by Cyrus, for that matter. So just wanted to point that out. The numbers also show just how much it had changed. Mm-hmm.
Do we have numbers for how many stayed behind?
I don't think we do. And probably because, God would know the number because He knows everything. But as far as, they would have been everywhere, all over, scattered all throughout the empire. It would be interesting to have that number, or even an estimate of that number if it was even possible, just to compare. But the only thing we can compare it to is the countings of the people before all of this happened. And what was it, 600-something, 30,000 men of fighting age, if I'm not mistaken, 600-something thousand, somewhere around in that ballpark. Now we have 42,000, not just men of fighting age, but everybody, not counting the servants, male and female servants. So a very meager number, to say the least. But they were the ones. This was it. God had sort of sifted through, in a way, His people as He had done in the past, and He had many sort of little startings over throughout the period of Israel, the Old Testament period, and this was just another one of them. Sadly, as spoiler alert, as we go along in this study, we'll see it wasn't a utopia by any means, but spiritually speaking. But they didn't hang on long spiritually to these new abilities. Remember, they couldn't worship according to the law of Moses in Babylonia. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the law, as far as we can tell, because everything in the temple was destroyed. Everything was taken and destroyed. They weren't able to do any of that, which is referenced somewhere. It evades me at the moment, but how for that period, God said, I didn't require sacrifices of you. For that whole period, you didn't have to do that. And they wouldn't have been able to do it because you have to have the things to be able to do it, to be able to do it. So anyway, it says, some of the heads of the families, when they came to the house of Jehovah that is in Jerusalem, made free will offerings for the house of God to erect it on its site. So exactly where it was before, here they're back. They are back now. Most of them, if not all of them, for the first time ever, with the possible exception of those men, older men that, like I mentioned earlier, that had some recollection in some way of the old one. So we're running out of time, so very quickly, what applications can we possibly get from this? Well, there's a couple. We already dealt with this one. We shouldn't give Cyrus more credit than he deserves. I'm a big proponent of giving people the credit they deserve, even if they're wicked people, evil people. Sometimes when a wicked person does a good thing, then say he did a good thing, okay? But this was not all Cyrus's doing. God had a big part in it. Not just the prophesying of it, but in some way stirring up his heart to do it. But, like I already said, nevertheless, he did do it. He could have said no. I don't care what that God said. I'm not going to do it. But, on the contrary, his heart was actually stirred up to do the thing that unknown God had said he wanted to happen. So, God was in control, and God used a willing man to accomplish his will, which God is very capable of doing and has done it many times. Again, remember Nebuchadnezzar, who was nothing like Cyrus. Talk about giving a man credit where it's due. It's hard to find that for Nebuchadnezzar. Any man who makes another man watch his sons get brutally murdered and then gouges out his eyes after he had to see that is not a good man. That was Nebuchadnezzar. Says it all, okay? The very last thing you're going to see with your real eyes is your two sons being brutally murdered. Then we're going to gouge out your eyes. Absolutely horrible. But God even used him to bring about a part of his will. And then finally, number 2, God's work can't be done without proper resources. This is where the other people come in. The ones that were not willing or able to go. And I can't help but point out again, it does show the mercy of God too. Because we don't have any record whatsoever that God was disappointed with the ones who didn't go back, that he was ashamed of them, or that he warned them like that if you stay here, you're no longer mine, or anything like that. Well, that's not even part of the sacred record here. So that leads us to assume that that was okay. He understood. But that doesn't mean that they did not have an obligation as well. And that's where the benevolence, the giving. I can't go there, but I can help the people that are going there go there. Yeah, Dean?
Well, depends on when they were taken to captivity, how old it was. Well, here 70 years passed. So some of them, 7 years takes on a different in a person's life.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that there was possibly some that were taken captive, possibly died since then.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm sure that some would have died, and so there were little ones, and so some of the older ones possibly, that was like you showed on the map. It was a pretty good journey, and it would have been a lot harder for them to go.
Yeah.
The younger ones, yes.
Yeah, physically and mentally, it would be easier for the younger ones to go. But it's almost impossible to not see the correlation of this concept to the church today. And like missionary work, for instance. It's not convenient, and I don't just mean that in a selfish way, but it's very difficult for some people to be able to go over to Asia, and Africa or anywhere overseas and try to preach the gospel for an extended period of time. That's just not in the cards for most people. At this time, maybe later. But in the meantime, there are people who are able and willing to go, and we can still have a hand in that. And we do have a hand in that by contributing to those efforts, because they don't just need money for plane tickets. They need money for a lot of the things. That's the only way to get those kinds of things done. We can take part in those missionary efforts by giving to them, supporting them, just like the people that stayed behind in various parts of Babylonia took part in the rebuilding of the temple, even if they never lifted a hand to lay a stone or a brick on there.